Good day, everyone. So, for today's discussion, we'll be focusing on the confessional literary movement. So, our group will be presenting this topic. I'm Miss Lopez and I'm with Miss Adanya, Mr. Ilustre, and Miss Lanusa. So, for the first part, I will be discussing the definition of the confessional literary movement. So, let's start. Good day, everyone. I'm Ernestine Lopez, and before we dive deeper to our topic, let us first understand why is it called confessional literary movement. So, the word confessional actually comes from the word confessing. So, we all know when we are confessing, we're like sharing our personal thoughts or our feelings or even our secrets, right? So, next. So, to dive deeper to why is it called a confessional literary movement, we have three bullets here and we will discuss it one by one. So, the first bullet says the confessional literary movement is a literary movement where the writer is the main subject of the literary work. So, because of this, the writer becomes the main subject of the literary work. Instead of focusing on the character who's completely made up, the story is the story centered is the author's personal life. So the next bullet, it is a form of literature that focuses more on personal truth rather than imagination. So what makes confessional literary movement unique is that it is more focused on personal truth rather than imagination. So the goal is not just to entertain, but to be real or to be honest. So the authors share their genuine feelings even though that feelings is uncomfortable or difficult to talk about. So the last bullet says confessional writing is literature that turns private experiences into public literature. So, for example, the authors want to write about their personal experiences that other people's keeps in private. So, because of this, the story becomes more relatable or more personal, allowing the authors and the readers connect to each other. So that's all for the three bullets. And to sum it up, it is called a confessional literary movement because it is focuses on self-expression and revealing the personal truth rather than imagination. So to continue, Ms. Lanuso will be discussing the history of the confessional literary movement.
Thank you so much, Miss Ernestine Lopez, for introducing our main topic, which is the literary movements in confessional. So I'm going to talk now about the historical background. My name is Teacher Junel. So we're going to start to discuss the historical background about the confession or the confessional. So a quick historical background about this is the confessional literary movement emerged in the mid 20th century, particularly during the 1950s and the 1960s in the United States. So basically, this period followed the aftermath of World War II, which is a time when society was dealing with emotional trauma, identity struggles, and rapid social change. So during this era, literature began to shift away from traditional formal styles towards more personal and emotionally raw expressions because of their personal experiences. So writers were influenced the growing interest in psychology, especially the ideas of Sigmund Freud. So, which encourage us to explore the unconscious mind's inner conflicts and personal experiences. So, confessional literature become a reaction against earlier literary movements like modernism. So, what is modernism? Which this is often focused on structure and impersonality. So, instead, confessional writers openly shared their private lives, including topics that were considered taboo, which such as mental illness, sexuality, family conflict, or personal trauma. So this movement was also shaped by a cultural shifts in the United States, including changing views on gender roles, the rise of individualism, and increases of awareness of mental health issues. So this is changes encourage us to or encourage the writers to break the silence and speak honestly about their inner struggles. So some of the most figures in this movement was Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, and Robert Lowell, which will be discussed later on. So they used their works to express deeply personal emotions and life experiences. So overall, the confessional literary movement marked a major turning point in literature by emphasizing authenticity, self-expression, and emotional truth, reflecting the complexities of human experiences in a rapid changing world. One of the most important turning points in the development of the confessional theory movement was the publication of life studies in 1959 by Robert Lowell. So, this collection is widely regarded by scholars and critics as the movement when confessional poetry began to take a shape as a distinct literary movement. So, before the release of Life Studies, much of poetry in the early 20th century was influenced by formalism and impersonality. So writers often focus more on the structure, the symbolism, and the universal themes rather than revealing their personal lives. So emotions here were usually controlled, and poets maintained a certain distance between themselves and their work. So, however, Lowell challenged this tradition by shifting the focus inward toward his own experiences, memories, and psychological struggles, which I talked earlier, which is the personal trauma, personal experiences. So, in life studies, Lowell wrote about deeply personal topics a such as his troubled family background. So his experiences also with mental illness and his time spent in psychiatric hospitals. So making his work both shocking and revolutionary by openly discussing these aspects of his life. So Lowell broke the boundaries of what was acceptable in poetry and introduced a new level of honesty and vulnerability. So another important feature of life studies is its change in style because Lowell moved away from strict poetic forms and embraced a more conversational and narrative tone. So his language became simpler, more direct, and easier to understand, which allowed readers to connect more deeply with his experiences. So, this stylistic shift made poetry feel more personal and almost like reading a diary or listening to someone's real life story. So, the influence of life studies was very significant and far reaching. It inspired other poets such as Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton to adapt they adapt a similar approach in their own writing. So these poets also began to explore themes like identity, depression, trauma, and personal relationships. So further developing what became known as a confessional poetry. So in addition, the success of life studies reflected a broader cultural shift during the late 1950s. So society was becoming more open to discussing mental health and personal issues, and Lowell's work resonated with readers who were experiencing similar struggles. So his poetry gave a chance to emotions and experiences that many people had previously kept hidden. So overall, To sum it up, Life Studies is considered a foundational text of the confessional literary movement because it introduced a new way of writing that emphasize personal truth, emotional depth, and self revelation. It's not only transformed poetry as a literary form, but also paved the way for future writers to express their inner lives with honesty and courage. So that's it for my part. So next one will be the what's the next one? Key characteristics will be discussed by Miss Mark Illustrate. Thank you so much.
Now let's talk about the key characteristics of this literary movement or the key characteristic of confessional literary movement. What are the themes of confessional literary movement? Confessional writing focuses on intimate and often painful personal topics such as mental health, the depression, anxiety, family relationships, the parents, marriage, and trauma. Okay, one of the great examples that we can use that has a theme of mental health is the Sylvia Plath novel, The Bell Jar. Are you familiar with Sylvia Plath? Okay, Sylvia Plath was one of the most influential writers during this movement. Okay, her works stand out because she wrote with honest, brutal honest about her inner life. Sylvia Plath suffered from depression uh, for most of her adult life. And The Bell Jar, which is her semi autobiographical story, is a story of Esther Greenwood, a bright, talented, and young woman who struggles with depression and societal expectation in the 1950s. Despite her success during an internship in New York, she feels lost and disconnected. And, and as her mental health declines, she undergoes psychiatric treatment and gradually begins to recover. Okay, the novel ends with Esther cautiously hopeful about her the death, loss, and grief, and the taboo subjects such as addiction, abuse, and sexuality are one of the themes of this literary movement. Now let's talk about the style or how it is written. It is written on autobiographical way or based on the writer's real life experiences. It also uses first person point of view, the use of I, me, and my when narrating the story, and it was emotionally intense and honest. It often feels like a personal confession or diary entry and may include fragmented or non-linear storytelling. So basically, the style that the author used during this literary movement is like a confession or a journal. They write their personal experiences like they writing a journal during this period. Lastly, the language or how it sounds. First, it is simple, direct, and raw, and not overly formal or decorative. It also uses everyday language to express deep emotions, sometimes shocking or blunt to reflect real feelings, and lastly, rich in imagery and symbolism, but still personal.